Let's sketch a belted kingfisher. This is a pretty common species in North America. I'm in Minnesota and I see them regularly, although this year has been rather quiet for them. I had an encounter this spring and actually some reports of them through the winter time. I'm working from a copyright-free image and I am mapping out a smaller study for a larger pastel I would like to work on. The paper I'm using is a bit experimental. It has more texture or tooth to it than I would prefer, so I'm going to be starting out working in pan pastel so I can get some pigment down onto this surface. We'll see how it goes. Here's the image I'm working from. This is a belted kingfisher picture that I found off of Pixabay, so it's a copyright-free image. You can see I have two images side by side. There's the belted kingfisher on the left, and then on the right I have a common kingfisher, which I have a really good image for, but I want to create a piece that's a North American bird because that's my location. This is the common kingfisher, and I have a nice watercolor painting of it as a study, but I want to stick with a North American species. The paper that I'm using is Canson, and it is the Mi-Tint paper. It is a tinted ground, and I am using the side that has a bit of texture, and I'm not a big fan of it. I have a big pad sitting in my studio that I haven't used on anything because I cannot figure out what to do with it. The one side is too much texture, it's too bumpy to accept pastels, and the other side is too smooth. I don't use colored pencil. I think colored pencil artists really like it, but I am struggling a bit with it. On the Canson paper, I created a pencil drawing of each of these birds, and then I sealed that drawing in with the pastel ground made by Golden, which I've used on other types of paper and surfaces. This creates a little bit more toothy surface that I can work soft pastel into. For the first color layer in my background, I'm using pan pastel, and I'm using a soft tool to blend it. That's the paintbrush looking thing that you see me using all over this piece. I can mix the pan pastels and they create a very soft edge, so you're able to put down big areas of color fairly quickly and not burn through a bunch of like pencils getting ground down. Or the other issue is if you go straight to soft pastel, you'll fill up the tooth of the paper so quickly you can't create the number of layers you'll need to bring in some detail. For my next layer, I'm using NuPastel by Prismacolor. This is a harder pastel. In fact, it's a fairly hard pastel. And I'm able to sharpen it down a little bit like a crayon so I can get a little bit of detail, but it's not a super fine detail layer. I'm having some issues with the NuPastel just looking bumpy on this honeycomb paper, even with the pastel ground over it. So I'm having to bring in some soft pastel earlier than I'd like to. You can see me layering that on and then smudging it back out with the soft tool. So I'm kind of going back and forth and just playing with what will help this drawing develop into more of a painterly feel. This next section is really just me struggling to build up some of the lights and bring that back into this piece. I'm using NuPastel. I'm using another harder pastel, trying to build it up. But again, I'm struggling because I'm getting more texture than I want. By this layer of the painting, I really want the texture to be created by the way I'm putting the pastels down. So I'm going back and forth, doing more blending than I would prefer to at this stage, but it's all good. I'm just experimenting with some leftover paper that I've got in the studio, and I'm hoping to create a study I can work from for a larger painting. The size of this piece, as I have it laid out here, is about 7 inches by 11 inches, and that scales up to the exact proportions of the painting I want to create from this. It'll be about twice as big. I'm debating if I do this painting in pastel, I'll have a really good working idea of what tools I want to use, but I'm still kind of waffling back and forth about, am I gonna do a large painting in pastel that then I have to frame under glass, or am I going to try doing something in oil or possibly even acrylic? At this point, I've used pan pastel to map in the dark browns for the branch that are underneath the kingfisher's feet. I'm blending that so it's not got hard edges because I don't want your eye to go right to this. And I will have another pass over this painting to create a little bit more detail in the kingfisher and probably soften the background. I may play around with another pass of color behind the kingfisher's head for those bouquet spots. At this point, it's close. I need another working session on it, but I have a pretty decent color map and I've been able to play with the composition that I would like to use for a larger painting. I'm going to call it for this session. I've gotten most of what I wanted to complete in this first pass down. I have a decent sketch, I've played with the composition, and I've got a pretty good color map. So stay tuned. Time will tell if this becomes a bigger painting. I hope it does, but it might change a bit before you see it as a finished piece. Thanks for watching. Bye.